Hello, great day, everyone. It's Carlos. Happy Monday to everyone. Today is Monday, October the 5th. I want to welcome everyone to a Gadfly live stream. And if this is the first time that you've tuned in to the Gadfly, I want to welcome you and also please visit the gadfly.vhx.tv. This is our multi-contributor platform. Basically, we created this to really get away from YouTube, some of the censorship that has occurred the past few years as it relates to content. We have the contributors, Jim Willie, London Paul, Ken Shortman Jr., and then also you can follow our work on our social platforms, which is at the Gadfly MCN. And then we do have a YouTube page that we manage for public live streams and so forth. And very excited to be joined by Ken Shortman Jr. of shotguneconomics.com. And we also have contributor London Paul, and his site is theseriousreport.com. So Ken, Paul, happy Monday, gentlemen. How you both doing?
Morning, everyone.
Yes, morning. Yeah, very well, thank you. And you?
I'm doing great. You know, we took a few days, and we did have in our forum some people threw up some. We started one of the streams that was started is just it relates to the actual COVID and the diagnosis that Trump received, and I thought we could start there and work our way around to a few other topics if you'd like. So whoever wants to kick it off in regards to Trump and COVID-19.
I'll jump in because I think Paul is going to go ahead and expand on something. Over the weekend, Paul and I were on occasion, you know, he'd send me a chat and a text and mention some things he's hearing from his sources. And then I was talking about some of the things that, you know, the insiders in Trump administration, the Mark Meadows, the doctors and that, and there was so much disinformation about the status of Trump. It was not even funny. So, you know, I had to really pose the question, was Trump in dire straits, getting worse, or was this pretty much something on purpose to create the chaos? Because underlying the whole thing with the Trump and the COVID, it reminds me of what, you know, the reactions from the media. Everything is about narrative. And what I mean by narrative is the media expects that presidents are going to act a certain way. Doctors are going to act a certain way. The people are going to act a certain way. Everybody must act a certain way. And when you don't act the way that they tell you should act, then of course they vilify you, crucify you, and make this whole thing out, i.e. trying, you know, where in New York, it was some of the actions by Governor Cuomo that led to the deaths of a number of people, COVID or not COVID, but then they're trying to blame Trump because Trump didn't do what they wanted him to do, et cetera, ad nausea. So with that being said, the narrative, Trump, especially when he came out yesterday and did a little drive-by for all those supporters that were in front of Walter Reed, they just had apoplexy. They went into conniption. This is not what you do. This is, you know, the Secret Service, they're all getting COVID. I mean, it's just insane. And so with that, you know, like I said, Trump is a chaos factor. His whole thing is about creating chaos because the narrative is about instilling a paradigm of order that they feel that everybody should live under. And so, you know, in a sense, looking from the outside in, I was getting such a joy at watching people just explode along these lines. But the more important thing about it is Trump really, you know, sick, or is it like Dave Kranzler when he got COVID a few months ago? It was a really serious 3-day flu, and he was up and at him within less than a week.
Interesting take, Ken. Interesting. Paul, go for it.
Do you know, it's one of those. It's one of those things. It's like unraveling a billion pieces of string and trying to make sense of it. I mean, yeah. Look, the reality is with Trump, you can say it's one of either he hasn't got it and it's just a big publicity stunt. And I'm not, by the way, let's qualify this. I'm not saying this is the case. I'm just saying these are the scenarios. Either he's got it and it's quite mild and it's not that bad, or he's got it and it's very bad. And the problem that hasn't happened, there's been a myriad of contradictory statements, as Ken said. I mean, and when his own physician comes out and says, and I quote, "I didn't want to give any information that might steer the course of the illness in another direction," when he was asked why he was reluctant to answer specific questions. That was about Trump's health on, I guess that would have been Saturday. I mean, that is an absolutely bizarre statement, as though what he might say might change the course of whatever was wrong with Trump or otherwise. And these kind of statements don't help. And then there were statements that he was having experimental treatment, and then he was having other treatment which he would normally only give to someone who was pretty seriously ill. And then, of course, yes, there was the drive-by for which kind of was, the media, of course, lost the plot with it, but equally that just smacks of Trump trying to have some publicity stunt with this on some angle. And then, of course, there's 1,000 conspiracy theories that says, well, it wasn't even Trump in the convoy, and I don't deal with those kind of theories because it gets you absolutely nowhere. But I suspect on some level he's had something wrong with him, because in reality it's one of those situations. I mean, given that everyone thinks he's had a very ambivalent attitude to it and he's quite dismissive, for him to suddenly get it, I mean, he's going to get a huge backlash about this, because people will say, see, it can even affect the president, and this proves why you have to take it seriously. So it's not as though I think you're going to just create a publicity stunt and not actually have something wrong. I don't doubt there's something wrong. To what extent is not clear. But I mean, Dan trying to turn it into some sort of circus himself and going out really is just not helpful, because he's, on the one hand, I agree with Ken, but on the other hand, he's just stacking himself up for a world of problems, because he's given the media a stick to beat him with. And you'd think by now he would walk away from giving the media a stick to beat him with, even if he thinks it's quite amusing and somehow he's going to win as a result of this. He's not in the end. But the question is, to what extent is he ill? And I've heard 3 or 4 conflicting viewpoints on this. From, no, it's not that bad, to it's pretty bad, to he's very ill, to, and you're going, okay, which one of these is correct? Well, I guess ultimately the next few days will determine that, whether he's back at the White House, which there's rumors that may happen today, but let's wait and see. Or if he's still not in a few days, then you can start to suggest there's something else going on. But I do think he's definitely had something to some extent, because you're not going to make something up. I mean, it just doesn't stack up in my mind. So I think you can dismiss that one. So really, it's the question of the severity of what's wrong with it.
Yeah, with all things considered, gentlemen, I always try to find humor when I can, because I think it's important that we find time to laugh in these, considering where we are at this precedent time. But I have all the facts. I'm saying this jokingly, obviously, but I have all the facts, and I got it from a Q thread. Okay. What's really going on is that was a body double. That was a clone that was in the vehicle driving by. And you can actually tell in the previous Trump video, whenever he's talking in front of the camera, he's actually in a submarine, because you can see the submarine going up and down. And they safeguarded him because all these mass arrests are occurring this week. And so Trump needed to be in a submarine safe. I'm saying that jokingly. Somebody's going to take that off of there and put it out there on some platform. It's interesting. I have a different take on it. Obviously, we have Chuck Schumer coming out and specifically stating that we're seeing some of the being used for political gain, right? That it's not safe, that that we can't have the Supreme Court confirmations. That's a super spreader event, that all these people are coming down with this, so we can't have a Senate hearings. We just can't do it, and because it's so important, we can do it virtually. So we see some of the political things happening. But one thing that I don't hear anyone talking about is that I think it's pretty safe to assure at this point. I have no statistical, no analysis, no facts to state this, but if we have the most protected person in the world, and think of how hygienic, the cleaning, all the COVID precautions take care across the most important person in the world, and he still gets COVID, I think that you could probably say that we probably have reached herd immunity, and that all of us probably have been exposed to it by now, if not already. I mean, I know I'm just saying that out in theory, but that's just my take on it. That I didn't think anyone was like talking about, well, how exactly did he get it? Everything else like that. But I'll turn it over to you, Ken.
Well, the thing about it is he's done all these rallies. He did, went to the debate. He goes around. Inevitably, you can sanitize till the cows come home. It's not going to stop a virus like this from getting into certain areas, especially when you don't have absolute control. The thing about it is, you mentioned about the Schumer. What stands out more than anything is something I saw on Twitter when I was perusing earlier today. They were making a joke saying, I'm gonna step off Twitter for a few hours because I can't get into a conversation because everything is politicized. What'd you have for breakfast? Well, I had bacon. Well, pork is bad, and everything is politicized today. And so, pretty much everything is under that microcosm. When we see choices being made, decisions being made, things being said, everything is under this microcosm of politics. So the chances of getting real information in the end are going to be virtually slim to none. Even somebody who probably is right there with Trump and Pence, even they're going to be getting disinformation of what's going on. We're in a time and place where it's incredibly hard, extraordinarily hard to believe anything that is being said, being disseminated, going across the thing. It's pretty much, you have to see with your eyes, and well, even then, it's a crapshoot.
Yeah, Paul, you said something very interesting in regards to obviously we don't know this, but in fact that he was faking it or doing it for whatever reason. What do you think would be the benefits of doing that? What would be have you had any thoughts on would this why it might make sense for him to do this?
Okay, just a small point. I mean, the politicization, that's been evident for Trump for 4 years, and given we're a matter of weeks from an election, no wonder it's politicized to the point of absurdity. The other point regarding Trump is, if you think about the amount of people he's indirectly mixing with is enormous. So in fact, even though he is the president, I would suggest he may be far more at risk because of the fact he goes to rallies and all these people and all the people in his entourage and all the people they're mixing with. So I think that increases the risk. I mean, the only argument you could say with regards to Trump, if there was some it was just a media circus event. And if we suggest that, we're not saying it is the case, I think the logical reason why you would say he would do it is because then he can go, well, I got the coronavirus, I've survived, it's not that bad, and it's sort of, it's kind of a rallying call to his whole mantra all the way along. And on some level, he may think, oh, well, it'll look good. It's good optics for the election, that I pull through and I'm okay. And the fact he's gone on what looks like this kind of tour around the hospital and waving at all his supporters doesn't mean it was originally, that was the intention. But he's trying to exploit it. There's no doubt about that. So if he was in the first instance not actually really that ill or something, and it was just a great big publicity stunt, then the fact he goes on this tour now would support that, but that doesn't mean it was the case in the first place. And I don't suspect it was the case, because you'd have to have this situation where now there's people in his entourage and inside the White House who are all being diagnosed with it. So what, are they all part of some grand plan? I think it just gets so convoluted. I would argue that was extremely unlikely. But the argument's always going to be, whatever happens in this situation, it's going to be politicized. Someone's going to try and go, well, Trump shouldn't have done this, and Trump should have done that, and Trump didn't wear a mask here, and Trump didn't do this, and of course that they're inevitably going to seize on this opportunity to try and in some way discredit Trump's attitude, and at times he hasn't helped himself. I mean, whatever people's perspective are, if you're the president, you need to be careful what you say, because it can be used in the future as a stick to beat you with. And I think they are using, Trump's own statements in the past for whatever reason he made them. has a stick to beat him with, and no surprise because where are we at? What day? 4 weeks nearly till the presidential election. So no surprise they'll do that.
One thing that stood out to me is why the COVID thing. Well, if you go back to the debate and you go back to something that Biden has tried to stick on, Biden has tried to attack Trump over the COVID. He blames him, for 200 million people dead. And they said, and in the debate, he said, or even some of his ads, when I get in, I'm going to get real doctors and real professionals. Well, shit, forgive my French. What do you think Fauci and Birx were? They were the ones that were there during the bird flu in 2009 when Obama and Biden were in office. So these people came to the forefront. They gave their contradictory statements between January and July. And so what, Biden's going to go back to them after they were the ones more than anything that failed a lot of the American people. So what, the only thing Biden is running on, think about this, going back to the debate. Yeah, it was a crap show, but Trump was successful in doing one thing. He got Biden to backtrack on nearly everything his base believes in. He got him to say, I'm not for the Green New Deal, even though it's right there on the front of his website. He said, I'm not for this, and he backtracked him on everything. So if you attack with if this is a politicization by Trump, then going after the one thing Biden is trying to hold his entire campaign on, if I were there, people wouldn't have died. And if Trump goes in, is there for 3 days, has COVID, comes out, and it just confirms what he's been saying. Yeah, it's a pandemic, but it's not as bad as the media, as the Democrats, as everybody is saying it is.
Yeah, very interesting. And, I don't have any facts or anything like that. This is just complete speculation. But one of the things that always sticks out to me is whenever John Brennan went on the attack after the administration. This was, 3 years ago, when he specifically stated, that you have to remember that the intelligence service has a million ways to come after you, and we can do that. In the event that, not saying that this was done on purpose, and they had this event, which they're labeling now quickly the super spreader event. I'm not sure if you guys have seen this, but they did have the ceremony to nominate Amy Coney Barrett for the Supreme Court, in which they have this picture, and obviously there's no social distancing, very little to any if mask, and now you have 2 senators, this event, and not speculating anything, but we know the intelligence services, we know about the efforts that are put forward to really disrupt this administration. So if that's the case and that's happened, and I sent you guys an email yesterday, do you think that by them pushing this entire COVID, that the whole White House, the whole administration, everything, that they're really looking at any type of continuity of government type procedures at all? In the event that this government,
if you want to jump in, Paul, I'll respond after.
Well, yeah. I mean, look, I was kind of wondering what the scenario will be. I mean, obviously, let's assume, for argument's sake, this was the case. What would happen if Trump subsequently his health was poor, he wasn't able to stand in, for the election in early November? What would be the outcome? What happens? And therefore, you're absolutely right, CJ. If you extrapolate this and start saying, well, there is issues with continuity of government because there's all these people in the White House and then in the extended Beltway are all going down with this virus, therefore continuity of government's a problem. What does that mean in reality? And I'm not sure what would happen. I mean, I don't understand that how the political system would work if suddenly, Trump, the Republican nominee, well, I don't know whether you call it a nominee, but obviously it's just for continuity. He's standing for a second term. If for some reason his health was in question, what would then happen to the election? Does the election get postponed? If it gets postponed, when does it get? When is it subsequently reorganized, to what date? And if it happens after January next year, then technically at least, and Pelosi then would arguably become president. What does that mean? And yeah, I mean, if you want to, be a bit conspiratorial and that, and okay, and we're throwing all these ideas. So before anyone gets in touch, because I always say I don't deal in this kind of thing. We're just speculating because that's the purpose of what we're doing today. And the question is, what's the ramifications for that if Trump wasn't well enough? Now, it looks, and because you want everyone in this world, whatever their political persuasion or who they are, to be well, fingers crossed Trump makes a full recovery and he's well, then that becomes irrelevant. But if he isn't, what's the ramifications? And I'm not really sure what would happen in that situation.
Yeah, the interesting thing is, in American politics, the Constitution does not validate political parties. Going back to, say, Andrew Jackson, the election of 1820, there were five primary candidates who got votes, got electors, whatever. They were all in the same party. 5 members of the singular Democratic Party ran for the presidency. So if Trump something happened to him or something happened to Biden or whatever, they would not halt the election. I mean, obviously the Democrats would scream bloody murder and do that, but it doesn't matter. People can write in candidates, they can do whatever. It's not about the political party. It's about what the people choose to do. Now, with that being said, 25th Amendment, of course, like first day, they're like everybody's screaming. And this goes back to what I mentioned in my first when we first got on. It's all about the narrative. Okay. The media and something you mentioned, Paul, why does Trump, try to swing this way and swing that way and say these things and whatever? Because if he doesn't say anything, the media is going to say for him. The media is going to try to impose that narrative and push to the public and say, all this is going on. If Trump wasn't out there tweeting against the Russia hoax, they'd still be talking about it 4 years later, type thing.
Well, but there's picking your battles and that. But there's sometimes he just shoots himself in the foot and the head by saying things he doesn't need to. I think that's my point.
I agree. And you know what? If this was 20 years ago, when people had a little bit more critical thinking and it wasn't just instantaneous reality TV show 5-minute attention spans, I would fully agree with you. But today it's about what is the most hyperbolous, sensationalist that you can do in a very short amount of span to throw something in people's memory, throw something in their emotions. That's what it's all about. That's one of the reasons why Trump was successful, because he understood marketing, he understood people, he understood the mentality of the American people today. Somebody like Trump would have never gotten in 20 years ago. It would have been we need that leader, we need the Bush senior, or we need the former governor who's got all this experience. Now people, they're talking Kanye West. Meghan Markle says she's going to run for president. I mean, it's just insane because it's now become a popularity contest and a celebrity contest. And if the media really isn't about providing the news, and it's simply an offshoot of TMZ in pretty much everything that they discuss, then that's really what politics has become today.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, interesting thoughts. I think that in part when you look at the approaching election cycle, I think the camps have already been drawn. I don't think you're gonna. If you're from Trump at this point, you're not going to change your mind. If you're for Biden at this point, you're not going to change your mind. So that important segment becomes the independent voters and what the independent voters see and how they react. And I don't have any formula to do this, but I would say there potentially could be a struggle so that when you see, because obviously I think Trump can't help himself sometimes. And I know he wanted to show support and go out and do that stuff. But I think it does paint that perfect scenario that builds into what the media and the Democratic Party is stating, is that that he's handled this for the most part irresponsible. I'm not saying he did. I'm saying it builds to that narrative when you see him doing those things, visually, and then they're talking about putting Secret Service. So I think it does have an impact to the independent voters, and I'm not sure how many are left at this stage. But I tell you what, we're gearing up for a very interesting election cycle in general, gentlemen.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, well, if you thought 2016 was bad, this is going to be insane.
But you're making a really an extremely valid and important point, CJ. That it's always that floating vote. You always have hardcore support for who'll always vote one way or the other, no matter who stands as the candidate. So it's that floating mass in the middle that will determine. And the problem is that it's very difficult to quantify given everything that's happened. I mean, okay, the notionally, as far as the markets are concerned, then everything's okay, and it's probably likely to remain that case. Okay, we know the economic reality is very different, but the question is, how many people have been economically impacted in the US? And this isn't about what people should think or understand. Their attitude might be, well, Trump caused this, I've lost my job, or I'm struggling to pay my rent or my mortgage, I'm fearful of the future. Trump was the president, it's his fault. And it's not a question of that being correct, it's a question of how people perceive things. And that could play a significant factor. Now, do I think Trump will lose? I think it's unlikely. But I've said for the last few months, I just feel within his camp, they feel there's a risk they're going to lose, and it's becoming more and more acute. Now, that could just be naturally sort of fearful of unknown outcomes, and maybe, but I detect it's more than that, and I think they are genuinely concerned they might lose this election, and that floating mass in the middle are very unpredictable, and their reasons for why they support Trump or don't, or support Biden, might be based in absolutely not a rational way of thinking. It can be very emotive, and it can be just their own personal circumstances. And I think that's what's concerning the Trump camp. And I do suspect they feel that there is a risk. And given how bizarre 2020's been for a whole bunch of reasons, and it just seems to, of course, it's just going to get more and more bizarre as the year wears on, and next year, because we're in this sort of end cycle, so the completely unpredictable chaos that's now ensuing means anything and everything is possible. So as much as I would sit there and think logically I can't see why Trump will lose, there are certain factors, and if we just account for the unpredictability of people, that introduces a degree of risk. And I've always said, as much as I don't regard Trump or Biden, either of them, as being who you'd want as the American president for the next 4 years, if you had to choose, for me, you would not want Biden. I mean, and that doesn't mean I'm a fan of what Trump's done. And people keep saying to me, well, this is going to happen and this is going to happen. I said, well, yeah, we've heard that for 4 years. And it was my understanding when he was elected. And of course, for whatever reason, it hasn't happened. But at the end of the day, that doesn't matter. It hasn't happened. And the fact it hasn't happened doesn't mean because he gets a second term, that's going to happen. And I think what also concerns me, even if he gets elected, we're increasingly seeing big corporations, the banks, the financial sector. You raised the point as well about the military-industrial complex. They're all veering away from Trump and towards Biden. Now, even if Trump gets elected, what maybe isn't clear to everyone is big corporations, the military-industrial complex, and all these entities have enormous power and sway in US. And even if he gets the second term, I think he's going to struggle even more than he may have done or has done in his first term. So the idea, if he gets elected for a second term, all these things are going to pan out, I think, is largely wishful thinking. And I'm being very straight and honest because that's what we need to be. Okay, people will disagree with me, and that's fine. But from my perspective, that is wishful thinking, and I'm slightly concerned that even if he wins, that the resistance will be even stronger than what we saw in the first term.
Ken, thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, and in all honesty, that we are in a frequency shift. Whether it's cyclical that happens every century or so, or it's just the natural course of what happens, like the Roman Empire when it's on its downward side. It doesn't matter if Trump gets reelected. Within 4 years, we're still going to be having the same problems, if not worse, than we have currently. So, the question is, what happens after Trump? Nothing is really going to change. In the end, Paul has made some great points in the past about, Russia and China wanted to work with Trump early in his administration, and for a myriad of reasons, it just really didn't work out. It could be, because Trump was being bit by the Boltons of the world, or it was his own incompetence in foreign policy. But with that being said, Russia and China are still moving forward with their plans of the future of the chessboard. Meanwhile, the military-industrial complex, the airlines, everybody who wants to keep the status quo is going to continue to fight Trump every single step of the way. So, in the end, the big losers are going to be the American people.
Ken, you said something very interesting, and I've had some thoughts of this, and not to pat myself on the back or anything like that, but I remember clear back to the Republican debates when there was 13 or 14 at one time, and then it dwindled down, and I started early predicting, like just seeing and hearing what Trump was saying during that time period. I could tell that he was going to win, like flat out, even before even knowing who the Democratic nominee was going to be, just by the momentum, the shift that was occurring. But then also I was one of the first to call out that he's going to lose the Congress. I could see that momentum happening. You could tell, and everyone's like, no, he's not going to lose the Congress. And then boom, they lose the Congress, and like, well, that's okay because we still have the Senate. This is a very interesting election cycle that we're witnessing. And Ken, you alluded to the fact that most people are going to automatically perceive that even if Trump wins re-election, the next 4 years are going to be even more chaotic than the first four. So what my thought process is, by assessing that and then taking a look at the magnitude of people's lifestyles that have changed due to COVID. Think of the college age kids, the high school age kids that are doing all the e-learning. For the most part, some of their sports have been canceled. You see the economic toll that it's taking with the unemployment. You see, my gosh, we won't have any movie theaters probably within the next 6 months. AMC just announced that they're closing across the country. Flick's Brewhouse announced they're closing across the country. The livelihood of everyone has been impacted so much that I think that there's a variable there where they consider that, they say, hey, you know what, maybe a changing guard would be good. Maybe it's time. And I'm seeing that more and more. I'm at the point now where I'm close to even predicting a Democratic sweep across the Senate and the Oval Office. And I think that there are some things that kind of confirm that, just based upon, one is the military industrial complex now pivoting away because Trump didn't give them the war that they wanted. So they're pivoting and showing support for Biden. But more importantly, in regards to big business and banks and the Chamber of Commerce, who are spending almost every one of their funds through these Senate campaigns in Democratic areas, and then also backing Biden. So I just say that because I think that people, it's fair assessment. And I don't know, my gut tells me that I think that a lot of people who are supporting Trump are going to be in for a rude awakening come this election cycle.
Perhaps. I think that the big monkey, in the room, or elephant in the room, was the what happened in the cities, the pure chaos of what happened in Seattle, New York, etc. If that had not occurred, I think that we were full sure that Trump was going to get they were going to be able to do it. But I have heard from so many different people, sources, that Democrats independents for sure, but Democrats especially are leaving in mass. They are seeing this is the Democratic Party, the AOC party, and I don't want anything to do with it. I'm done. I'm gone. And I think that's going to be a big, huge sticking point when it comes to what we see come next month.
Paul, go for it.
Yeah, well, do you know what? You both make extremely important and valid points, and that's what creates this huge degree of uncertainty. I mean, the logical thing, but I mean, here's the point. I mean, okay, we go back to 2016, and before Trump stood, even as a nominee, it was said to me, Trump will win the next election. Trump will win the 2016 election. This was before and I was like, what? He's not even standing. Oh no, he'll stand. He'll win, provided they don't kill him, whoever they are, and that's beside the point. So of course Trump won. Well, now a lot of people at the time, at that point was saying, well, I'm not sure about Trump. I mean, even there's people I knew who thought Trump would win, but when it came to the crunch, they went, no, I'm just not. I just don't think he'll win. I think when a push comes to pull, people won't vote for him, and Clinton will win. Okay, we know clearly that didn't happen. But I think this time, it's almost the flip where everyone's going, well, Biden's not got a chance. And you'd think in reality, no, he hasn't. And that may actually make him more dangerous because people may get complacent as well and go, oh, I don't need to bother voting. I can't be bothered voting because Trump's going to win and it won't matter anyway. And that does happen sometimes where complacency loses someone, maybe, well, in the UK sense, you might lose a parliamentary seat or you might lose an election. So I don't think we can say with any degree of confidence. And economic reality is biting harder and harder every day, and that may be a big swing in terms of people's perspective. And whilst with the illusion keeps going, because I think I don't want to get into the economics, but the Dow was over 300 points, etc., and everyone seems to think, oh, everything's fine because it looks like Trump's okay, but that's not reality anymore. And what's playing out now is the reality, and the reality is hitting every person, and it's only going to get worse and worse. And I think the argument would be, even if Trump wins, we know in the next 4 years, and I'll say this with absolute 100% certainty, there is no way in the next 4 years the dollar's going to collapse, the end of US hegemony, the end of the world reserve currency, the end of the Western Empire, for want of a better word, and the complete rise and birth of the Eurasian multipolar world. That's an absolute inevitability. So the question is, from Trump's perspective as well, is would you be sat there going, from here, would you really want to win the election? Because Trump, the one thing Trump would never want to be seen to be the president that presided over a nation that actually all those things happen. And I'm not saying Trump's going to throw the election or doesn't want to win the election, but there must be part of him who's now going, because he knew in 2016 before the election what was going to happen. He knew the dollar was going to disappear. It was the end of, the dollar as the world reserve currency, etc., etc. Now he must be reflecting on that, going, well, that's a distinct possibility. Yet, what happens when I'm the president and I'm remembered as the president when this has happened? Because at the end of the day, the American people will only remember that. And again, most of them, because they're not going to necessarily have the interest, will blame him. Trump will be blamed for why this happened, much as Trump's going to be blamed for why things happen to do with the coronavirus. Even though, we know how states have behaved and what states have done that they shouldn't have done. But people don't think like that. And that poses, I think, a huge risk. So I think it's in the melting pot now. I would honestly say I don't really have a clue who's going to win. And as much as my head says Trump must win, I'm really not sure anymore. And therefore, the ramifications will be as unlikely as we think. If Biden wins, what does that mean for the US going forward? What does that mean for the average American person? What does that mean for US foreign policy? And how does that factor into the world that's moving ahead? And you're right, Ken, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter ultimately, but there is going to be some policy tweaks that will happen if Trump isn't elected, or Biden, on the conversely, is elected. So the point of what we're doing today is we're not agreeing with Biden. I'm not supporting Biden or anything. We're just throwing scenarios of what would happen if this happened. And I think it's important to have these discussions rather than go, well, Trump will just win, so it doesn't really matter. It's going to be the same as usual. Well, for me, if Trump does the same as usual in the next 4 years, that would be extremely disadvantageous to the American people. There's gonna have to be some major changes. Although I think the US is largely out of time from an economic standpoint to make those changes. But it's never too late to bite bullets and make those changes. But I'm not sure Trump's in a position to do it, because one man can't do it, whether he wants to do it, or he's inclined to do it, or even believes that he should do it anymore.
Great points, both of you. Absolutely. Ken, what else is on your radar? Any other thoughts?
Oh, I don't know what Paul noticed this morning, but I woke up and took a look at the markets, and I'm sitting and going, how did the 10-year jump from 0.65 to 0.75 overnight? The dollar's dropping, gold is well back up, and of course the thing. It's not Trump, it's inflation. Yes. The markets are just screaming inflation, and I wonder if Jay Powell is like going through apoplexy right now, going, "Holy shit, this stuff is going to start getting away from us," and we're holding on to this narrative, as I've mentioned, that we have to pump up inflation. I think we're really on the cusp as we enter into October. There is going to be an economic surprise. It may benefit Trump in that the markets are going to go up, and the only reason they're going up is because inflation, and it's going to force the Fed to print more money. But with that being said, if we start seeing interest rates rise, the housing bubble boom that's occurred here in the lockdown phase is going to go completely tango uniform, and I think we may see 2,000 gold within, definitely by the end of the month, or back to 2,000 gold, but even in a shorter amount of time if it really gets away from them.
Yeah, well, I know we don't. We would have talked about this if we'd just done the economics, but yeah, it was kind of very noticeable, a big spike in the 10-year. And my always question with this is, who's dumping them? Who's dumping all the 10-year, and why are they dumping it? And you're absolutely right, it's screaming inflation, which is why gold actually, I think it got nearly to 1920. And it was interesting to note silver, well, it got to about 24.50. It's not far off that now. But yes, there was a big pump in the markets. Now the argument would be, oh, well, that was because everyone thinks Trump's okay. But no, I think that's just a bit of a white elephant in this regard. That it is, I think it's screaming inflation. So you're right. The Dow will just keep going up and up and up because, if it's screaming inflation. I think what's also worth noting, as you rightly said, is the dollar basket was down, which basically means the dollar, is being sold with respect to the euro, because the euro is the biggest weighting in the dollar basket. But again, as we've touched on before, look at the dollar yuan. There's still a big move out the dollar into the yuan, and I think it was at 6.72 when I last looked. It's down about 0.5% today. So, yeah, as much as the Fed telegraphed, they knew inflation's coming. And of course, it's just going to scream more and more money printing, and the Fed's going, we don't want to print. So I think there's enormous pressure to try and get another fiscal stimulus bill, while as they keep printing, and that money goes into Main Street. We're going to see more and more inflation. But I'm certainly seeing more price inflation here in the UK. There's the old predictable shrinkflation, but you're seeing price inflation in certain food items. So it's inevitable that inflation is now baked in the cake, and it's only going to get worse and worse. And the Fed loses control of inflation, and it thinks, well, we'll keep control of the yield curve. Well, I think this next week will determine whether they've lost control of it, or not. And if the 10-year yield keeps rising, then the argument is they've lost control of interest rates as well. And we always said in the end they would do, but if they lose it this quickly, then to me it's indicative of major structural problems. And we've talked about this before. And September, October times always a bit precarious. And as much as we think, well, maybe they've got it under control, maybe they haven't, because we've talked about certainly problems in the financial system. We've talked about problems in banks, etc., etc. Maybe there is something brewing in the background that is indicative of the fact that a major crisis might happen before. Is it November the 3rd, the election? I think it is, if my memory serves me right, which gives us, 4 weeks or so. So we'll see what actually happens. But yes, that was very telling this morning. So when CJ said, "Is there anything else?" I knew straight away.
It's that elf in the room again.
Yeah, it is. I mean, the economic indicator, and that very well potentially could be the October surprise, just in part that, the economic reality at some point, has to hit. And when you see the airlines that receive the bailout money, when again they're getting ready to shutter thousands of jobs, we hear the other closings of other retail outlets that are happening. People will start to understand that, but people do look at the Dow as part of the economic scorecard, if you will, of the country, and they continue to pump that.
Pretty much. But plus the fact that, if you take a look at the equity markets as a whole, they reached their peak during the biggest part of lockdown before a lot of things started to open. And now that more and more things are opening, what does that do? It naturally increases money velocity. People are going out a little bit more. They're spending. By the way, one of the more interesting things you mentioned, Paul, about people and changing lifestyles. We talked about this back when a lot of the companies were sending people home. They didn't want to take the liability of people getting coronavirus in an office setting. And all of a sudden people wake up and go, "Oh, I can telecommute. It's not a bad deal at all. As a matter of fact, it's really productive." The airlines are looking for a bailout. The cruise ships are looking at a bailout. We may see the end of movie theaters as we know it. The reality is that people spend and waste too much money on things they don't need. They go into debt to buy things that they don't need. Now, the flip side, or the bad side of this, is that America has become nearly a 100% consumer nation, 70% if you look at the GDP, very little productivity, and most of the work they do is not really productive. You go out to Silicon Valley, what real productivity and benefit does Facebook or social media do? Okay, you pass around information, but it's nothing tangible that you actually produce. So much work in this country is done that is pretty much just the sharing of information and not the producing of tangible goods anymore. And if it wasn't for the retailers and people going out and spend, I think we're going to see a bit, people may go back to a more frugal mentality. I'm hoping. You don't need 10 billion Starbucks on every corner. You don't need, 1,000 chain restaurants. People can cook their own food, or at least relearn how to do that. You have streaming. So why do you necessarily have to go to the theater on a regular basis? People need to get back to a mindset of frugality and not going into debt to buy frivolous stuff that is a complete waste, in my opinion. I'm hoping that's a paradigm that occurs. But if what we see inevitably is going to happen with the dollar, that's going to be forced on people anyway, especially when their purchasing power is cut by a third to a half.
Right. Yep. Great point. Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, it's worth mentioning. There's because I've obviously got a ticker that comes up with a whole bunch of it's all financially related headlines. And what we normally do, CJ, if something pops up, I'll mention it. But it's interesting. The Fed's Evans has come out and gone, well, I'm hopeful we'll get more fiscal stimulus. And you can see that the Fed's going, we need stimulus, but we'd rather not be the ones looking like it's us. We want the government. You know, we want it to look like government is behind this. And I think what it is that it's increasing. They're just trying to abdicate their responsibility and hoping somehow when the inevitable happens that they can duck out of this and go, oh, it wasn't our fault. We did everything we could. The government failed to do the necessary fiscal measures. Our monetary policy was fine. Well, of course, we know it's absolute garbage. But you're detecting as much as anything, and you're right in when we've discussed this before, Ken, that the Fed knows they're out of ammunition. I mean, you know, if you pump $1 trillion in and you get, you know, I'm exaggerating for effect, $1,000 out, then it's absolutely pointless doing this. But they're absolutely desperate now for the Treasury to get a fiscal bill, and it'll end up just becoming an ongoing fiscal bill. When that money's ran out, stimulus, then they're going to need more and more and more and more, and it will accelerate and accelerate to the point in the end that, you know, the Treasury is just going to be printing money because, of course, you get increasing unemployment, and because it's so service sector based. When someone loses their job in the service sector, then they don't have the money to spend into the service sector economy, which then loses. So it's a spiral, it's a snowballing effect. Why more and more jobs disappear. But what is also very clear now is huge amounts of corporations are in big trouble as well, and they are not going to be able to get out of this. So again, it comes back to this point. There isn't some great big plan, because when big corporations are struggling, and it's not going to just be the airlines, it's not just going to be, you know, the entertainment industry or, you know, the hospitality sector, it's also now increasingly becoming, you know, oil and gas sector in the United States. Okay, there's going to be odd companies, big tech companies that might just survive, but most corporations and also the big banks are going to be in enormous trouble, and they already are in enormous trouble, and it will just get worse and worse. And that's why you're seeing big corporations with mergers and acquisitions. They're downsizing, they're trying to have cost-cutting measures, they're making people redundant because they're trying to stave off the inevitable. But unless you're productive, you can try and cut costs, but you're still going to go bust. And it doesn't matter. Your underlying business isn't productive. It doesn't make a profit. You can cut all the corners you want. You're still not going to be profitable. And that's, unfortunately, and it's not just the US, it's the same here. I mean, every day of every week, there's some announcement with some company, some corporation. And what have I noticed? And I made a tweet about this. There's Tata Steel in Wales, and who's looking to buy it up? The Chinese. Who owns British Steel? The Chinese. And that's the thing. China will just come in, cherry pick the big corporations. And here's the argument: you may have reservations about China doing it, but if it means the business stays afloat and they keep people employed, they're not going to care whether it's the Chinese or the Russians or anyone else. Then they go, we want your money because you'll keep the business afloat. And that's increasingly going to be the case across Europe, the UK is part of Europe, but ultimately in the US as well. They're going to have to find buyers for businesses. And in the end, the likelihood is China will just come in and cherry pick what it wants to save and what it doesn't want to save. And that may be a very unpopular thing to say, and I'm not agreeing with it. But again, this is a fact of reality. This is what's coming. And whether people like it or not is no longer relevant. And I want to make a really important point. I think we're in a situation now we have to deal with realities, as unpalatable as they are, as much as we don't like them, as much as we don't agree with them. I think the time of sugarcoating things, and I know you made the point elsewhere, CJ, about Assange and what Christine Assange said about the whole sort of trust the plan and it's all a lie, and they're not doing anything to help Assange. In fact, Julian Assange, in fact, it's the reverse, is absolutely the case. And I think we need to stop going off on tangents and believing in all these wonderful fairy stories, because we've had 4 years of it, and if it hasn't happened by now, okay, I can't say it will never happen, but it is. You can't keep postponing it, and it's always manana. Well, as my mum said to me when I was very young, tomorrow never comes, because when it does, it's today. And that's the kind of, we need to get away from this mentality. It's always tomorrow something's going to happen. There are tough times ahead, and we have to accept that. We have to deal with it, and we have to do the best we can on an individual basis, no matter how tough that might be for us to do that. But that's the stark reality we're facing. And I think sugarcoating things and providing entertainment for people is ridiculous, because entertainment is of zero value or benefit to us going forward.
Ken, closing thoughts, please.
As we talked about at the beginning, we got less than 4 weeks, or approximately 4 weeks, until the election. If we thought the chaos and the madness and the confusion, the hyperbole and the sensationalism was bad now, all you had to do was look over the weekend. Chris Wallace was going from show to show to show to show to show to try to save his career.
Salvage it. I mean, I've never seen a journalist trying to justify his existence anymore. This is going to be one hell of a time. I can't even recall, going back to Nixon and Kennedy, how big and divided many things were. But the division is here. It's going to stay, and it's going to culminate no matter who becomes president, and probably long after Trump or Biden is out of office. Yep, I agree. Paul, closing thoughts, please.
Well, I guess I probably already said it, but no,
it kind of sounded like it, but I wanted to make sure to give you an opportunity.
Yeah, well, I mean, yes, Ken's absolutely right at the end. If Trump's elected, yes, okay, he's president for 4 more years, but the rebuild process for the US is going to take a decade. It could take 20 years. It might take 30 years. If you galvanize a nation, it might happen a lot sooner. But the US is in a pivotal point in history like we've never seen before. And you make the point, Ken, and it is true. We have this cyclical thing, and we're in the sort of 20s cycle. Okay, we didn't have World War I equivalent in the 10s, so to speak, and I don't expect to have World War II or the equivalent in the 30s. But the big difference is we're in that cyclical cycle. The difference is this time, the whole point is we're not going to repeat the previous cycle. We break through this cycle and into a very, very different paradigm shift. And that is going to present enormous challenges for Western people on every single level: financial, economic, political, geopolitical, societal. It will affect every one of our lives. And that's why I've said this, more than anything, is a reboot in humanity, in how we perceive things, how we deal things. And Ken, you make the small point about people's spending habits being different. That's one example of this, but that is what this fundamentally is about. And I've called it the glass ceiling, and we have to break through it. If we don't break through the glass ceiling, then we're just going to be destined to repeat the same nonsense over and over again until humanity slaps its proverbial face and goes, why the hell am I behaving like this? This has to end. This has to change. Well, the East's changing, Asia's changing, China's changing, Russia's changing, nations, and it's about time the West woke up and realized what actually matters and is important. And hopefully we'll learn sooner rather than later, because then the rebuild process will be a lot easier. It will take a lot of the challenges out of the way. But my biggest fear is Western nations internally are so polarized for all the reasons we've discussed before. And to change that mindset is going to be probably the hardest thing humanity has ever had to do in its entire history, given the gravity of what that means to individual people and collectively in the US, the UK, Germany, France, wherever that might be.
Yep. Gentlemen, I want to thank you both for a great conversation today, and for Gadfly subscribers for supporting our multi-channel network. We truly appreciate that. So please leave the comments in the forums or directly on this video. And if this is your first time tuning into a Gadfly live stream, please consider jumping over to the Gadfly website, which is the gadfly.vhx.tv. You can sign up for a 30-day free trial and then decide whether you want to do the $10 a month or the $100 a year. And I think it's just imperative, just to reiterate, kind of like what Paul alluded to in regards to the alternative media and finding sources for accurate information, not necessarily the clickbaits and everything else. And that's what you're going to get here on the Gadfly Multi-Channel Network. So Ken, Paul, thank you for a great discussion today, and let's do this again soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Yes, thank you. And to everyone listening, of course.